In her first comments since being sworn in, President Samia Suluhu Hassan vowed to unite the country and urged security agencies to ensure that normalcy returns. She blamed foreigners for last week's deadly protests.
During the campaign period, as a nation we were divided along ideologies and fan bases. But after the elections, whoever wins is the one that was voted for by the majority. They are the nation's choice and should serve all, from those who voted for them and those who voted for the opposition to the ones who abstained the vote altogether. Those of us who have been voted into office pledge to you, our fellow citizens, that we shall use all our strength, all our ability and all our knowledge in service of this nation.
We're now joined by Javan Naidu, a political economist at the Oxford Economics Africa in Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, the African Union's observer mission says Tanzania's election did not comply with democratic standards. What do you make of this statement and why now?
Thanks, Benya, for having me. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one because we've seen over the years SADC has lacked, it's been more barking than biting. The sense of it all, if you call it that. But I think it has to do with SADC's been a bit under pressure of late, considering what previous elections have been across the continent, where European or Western observers and human rights organizations have said, you know what, these elections are not free and fair in certain countries. So I think they've been under pressure to do something. And the fact in Tanzania that it was quite blatant, as you mentioned, there's been some challenges around that. But the fact that the internet was shut down and that when the foreign minister was questioned on the Saturday, last week Saturday after the elections, he couldn't give a quite a coherent answer as to why the internet was shut down. It was a very vague response. So I think that has sort of precipitated what SADC has said. They're quite concerned, given that Tanzania is quite a peaceful country, or at least historically.
Do we know the key aspects of the electoral process that the observers focused on?
Yes, so as you mentioned, one of the key processes is sort of pre-voting. So before the voting occurs, the election observers need to go into voting stations. They need to observe if there's enough materials. So a lot of them, there were issues of being denied. Some weren't given their letters. They weren't allowed to get near some of the polls. There were even some SADC observers were arrested, and they were asked to actually delete photos they had taken of the polling stations by security officials. So that was the one major concern. The other one that SADC cited within the broader political environment of Tanzania was that it was mainly CCM observers who were in there as party observers, which is quite concerning. Obviously, given the main opposition were barred, but the smaller parties just don't have the capacity to provide that oversight. So those were like the real things they are highlighted in there. It's a 14-page sort of general report, but those are the key concerns. And obviously the general political environment, they were concerned about opposition not being allowed. But the processes, I must highlight, they did make quite clear in the report, the processes of running the election did go fairly well. They ranged them anywhere between 70 and 80% in terms of how it actually went down, but the underlying characteristics were quite restrictive.
Now, looking ahead, how will this report affect Tanzania's standing within the African Union? And also, do you think it could pressure Tanzania to reform its electoral process?
So that's a very tricky one, right? Because it's maintaining your sovereignty, and while the African Union is the supranational body, African countries don't really have to agree with what they say. So I think it will have some negative sentiment on President Hassan and the CCM moving forward. So it will hurt them a little bit in the AU and as well as in the EAC region, because you'll have this sort of reputation and it will impact the reputational risk. So there will be some elements of it. But I think going forward, it might precipitate some of the changes. So President Hassan has been very clear in her electioneering campaign that she will look into the constitution. And when she initially became the president of Tanzania, she made some changes towards improving the democratic space. So I think this report and the global pressure and some of the bad media per se, or the optics of the unrest that Tanzania is getting, will put some pressure on President Hassan to make some changes or at least start talking about them.